Hello, everyone. Great to have you here for the first in a new series of TravMedia Meets. I'm Henry Hemming, Managing Director of TravMedia. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have TravMedia Meets live again. We took a little bit of a gap while everyone was sort of getting back to work and Zoom became a bit of a dirty word. But it's wonderful to start these again. You've all asked us to create more of these sessions for you, and we're delighted to say that we'll have 6 sessions in 2022. And to kick off, we've got a really special one. We've got Travel Editor's 2023 predictions. And let me introduce our guests today. They need little introduction, but we have Ben Ross, Head of Travel at the Telegraph. Morning, Ben.
Hello, hello.
Lisa Minot, Head of Travel at the Sun. Hi, Lisa.
Morning.
Helen Coffey, Travel Editor at the Independent.
Hiya.
And Sophie Griffiths, Editor, TTG.
Hi.
Lovely to have you all here. So we're going to hear from our team just how 2023 has started and whether this year is going to kind of give 2019 a run for its money or whether we're still a step or two behind. Importantly, we're going to hear our experts' predictions for travel patterns in the year ahead, especially given the cost of living concerns, sustainability drivers, and any lingering concerns about COVID. Having heard their tips and predictions, we're going to go to you, our audience, for questions. So do start thinking about questions for our experts now. You're free to post questions just as soon as you like. We'll be answering them once we've heard from our 4 guests. If you could post them using the Q&A functionality, that would be great. And I think you need to also just tell me your company name, just in case I don't know you. Let's have some really stimulating and interesting questions. I'm sure we're going to have people in the audience who will convince us that Brazil and Bridlington are going to be top of the pops this year, but we'll also hand over to our experts to tell us where they're really going to be focused. 2 quick points from TravMedia before we get started. This Friday, PRs, is the deadline for entries to the TravMedia Awards. So you've got to get your entry in by Friday. It's a 2-step process. If you haven't registered, you register, we send you a link. That'll give you the rest of the week to complete your entry. Most of you have already registered, or lots of you have. We've had a stunning entry. And the 5 categories are PR Newcomer, Digital Campaign, Campaign of the Year, In-House Team, PR Agency, and PR Professional, which actually is 6 categories if I think about it. And also, of course, IMM at the QEII is getting very close indeed, 13th to 14th of March. We're anticipating a sellout show this year. We've got a few stands left, so do secure one now. And we're hoping to get close to 400 media and influencers at the show. Right, that's quite enough from me. Let's get over to our guests and let's hear their predictions for the year ahead and also where they're going to be focusing their content. And I'm delighted to say that Sophie from TTG has offered to go first. So a very quick introduction on Sophie. Very brave of you, Sophie. Thank you. She's been editor of TTG for 6 years. Her full title is Editor and Chief Purpose Officer, TTG Media. This month, she was appointed the Chief Purpose Officer, aiming to keep the business on track with TTG's mission and commitment to promote smarter, better, fairer in the travel industry. She's originally from Cornwall, now lives in Essex with her wife and rescue cat and dog, escapes to the West Country and the beaches whenever she can, however lovely Essex is, and does so with dog and wife in tow. Sophie, over to you. What are your thoughts for 2023?
Hi, Henry. Thanks for having me here. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I thought it would be helpful if I gave a bit of an overview of what we're seeing at TTG in the market right now from a trade perspective, just to give an indication of the buoyancy of the market in the current climate. So just to give a bit of context, every month TTG runs what we call a travel agent tracker. So that's where we send a set survey to our readers and it looks at how their sales are going, which sectors are performing well, top destinations, how optimistic they're feeling, etc. We've just reported on our December tracker results. I'm going to touch on those first before we look at how Peaks has kind of kicked off, just because that gives an indication of how optimistic the trade really are feeling about 2023. So Looking specifically at the last weeks of December, 32% of respondents said that they took more new inquiries in December than they did in November. So it was clearly starting to pick up, and we're seeing peaks start earlier than ever, which I think is really interesting. In terms of what the worries are for those in the travel trade, so concern around price increases remain the top worry for agents. So that's worries about the fact that holidays prices are rocketing and what that might mean for customers, given the cost of living concerns. This was closely followed by getting hold of suppliers. This has been an issue throughout 2022, and it looks set to continue in 2023. We all know that recruitment has been a big problem in the travel industry over the last 12 months. Number 3 on the list of concerns was industrial action and strikes, and that was actually added into the survey for the first time, went straight into 3rd place. I think that really kind of echoes what people are feeling in the national sentiment at the moment. In terms of how optimistic agents are feeling, so 68% said that they were confident 2023 would be better than 2022. Around 32% said that they were 50-50, given the kind of cost of living concerns and the threats of a recession. But the fact that well over more than half said that they're feeling really optimistic for this year, I think is really exciting. We actually hosted a live travel agent tracker call last Thursday. So that's where lots of our travel agent audience join us live for an off-the-record editor's briefing. We kind of look at what's going on in the market. We talk to them and share our market findings. They said that those in that call that had said that they put 50-50, that said they weren't sure, they wanted to revise all of that because peaks had gotten off to an absolutely roaring start. So a lovely positive start to the year. So let's just look at peaks in particular. So last Saturday, on the 7th, it's dubbed so-called Sunshine Saturday. I have to say that I probably, like a lot of journalists, tend to roll my eyes when we all get lots of press releases about Sunshine Saturday and it's going to be a big bumper one. For us, it's not really news until it's happened. It's no good saying what they think is going to happen. And often it doesn't really turn out to be the biggest booking weekend of the year. But this year was very, very different. So I don't know if it's because it got a lot more mentions in the national press, or if it was just because loads of people just want to go away on holiday. But for whatever reason, this year's Sunshine Saturday was actually a really, really, really busy weekend. So if you look at the Advantage Travel Partnership, so that's a travel agent consortium, their members said that their sales on the Sunshine Saturday were more than double year on year, so that they were 117% higher compared with the same Saturday in 2022. Overall, since the beginning of the year, they said that their sales were up 75% versus the same period last year. Another agent has told TTG that his sales were up 300% year on year. There is a big caveat here. This time last year, we were in the middle of not quite an official lockdown, but it was very much stay-at-home guidance. You know, we all had the Omicron wave sweeping through. So comparing things year on year is always going to be a bit skewed. And I think we need to be really, really mindful of that when we get all these fantastic stats through. But that said, these are still quite impressive results. So we were speaking to individual agents, and the managing director of one agency in Preston told TTG that he's on a par at the moment with their best ever January in 2018. So they are really, really good results. It's not just that they're necessarily looking particularly amazing compared with last year. If we look at some of the trends in those results, what's interesting is when people are booking for, so the lates market is doing particularly well, and we saw that all the way through last year, and it looks like it's set to continue. And I think booking patterns are very different now to how they used to be in, say, 2019. It's probably an indication of the fact that people are very, very wary of what could be around the corner. After the last few years, we've all come to expect such a degree of uncertainty. We had the COVID years, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, rising inflation, Liz Truss becoming PM. So Advantage has said that lates is still comprising 1/3 of their members' peak sales. Another London-based agency, Swords Travel, has told TTG that the majority of their bookings are for the next 3 months. And they've noted that it's really interesting. People are wanting to book so late. They said even though the price is high because demand is so high and availability is still quite low. Pulling out some of the other trends, one agent told us that the family market wasn't particularly buoyant at the moment. They said that family holidays are the ones that they're really noticing that they're having to discount right now. So I think it's really clear that value for money is going to be much more important for the family sector. Kind of figures with the cost of living concerns, but I think it's just one to be aware of. Whereas in contrast, the couples market is really, really happy to get the quality and service that they're pushing for. And the same agent said that more 5-star properties have been sold for the couples market, booked for June, July and September. For the families that are booking, it looks like Greece is going to be another big seller this year. We really saw that last year. Other top selling destinations are Spain, obviously, Turkey's doing really well, and the US. So long haul is back, which I think is really exciting. I've just made a few notes as well. Henry, you asked us to say how industry PRs can best help TTG, and I know the other editors will share their thoughts in terms of making the most of this year. I had a quick think. There's something I always say, which is that it's always best to email the news team. I lose count of the number of emails I get from PRs direct to me just saying, here's a news press release, please can you write it up? I am not the person to send those emails to. You need to send them to the news team and the features team. Great to include me, but it's not going to get written up if you just send it to me. And specifically on the features side, I think one of the main things I would stress is deadlines. So if PRs really want to maximize coverage, then they need to be pitching ideas to TTG at least 3 months in advance. It might sound a little bit extreme, but TTG is now a monthly title. Our features ed Catherine is planning right the way through the year, so any time is really a good time. And we've also moved to a real focus on digital first features. So we're always really keen to hit those timely angles. As an example, if Japan was reopening, then pitch Catherine 10 tips from your top Japan expert and, you know, with relevant picks. And it's just an easy one to do if the timing is right. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I hope that's kind of given an overview of the market and, you know, the trends that we're seeing. I'm not sure if it will tally with what these guys are seeing on the consumer side, but I hope that was helpful for a quick rundown.
Fantastic, Sophie. I mean, it was interesting to read Julia Labou-Said of Advantage saying consumers are not foregoing their holidays. They'll do everything they can to afford one. Dame Irene Hayes echoed that sentiment, saying the last thing people want to do is give up their annual holidays. But there is pressure on price. And I've heard that the all-inclusive market's going to be strong this year, maybe all-inclusive for families. And
yeah, that's definitely what we're seeing. And certainly we saw that last year. And I think that's going to set to continue because it's that value piece. But yeah. I think to their point, people just don't want to give up their holidays. And I think everyone thought cost of living would equal, you know, people cutting back. But I think they're cutting back on that new car or that new sofa or whatever. They do not want to give up their holiday. And, you know, COVID perhaps in some ways has helped that because it's just, you know, people went 2 years without their holiday. It really exacerbated the fact that people need holidays and it's so important for them to not sacrifice that. So I think they'll start saving and they'll go, but I think when they book is changing.
And I think one of the reasons we didn't see the big bounce back of 2022 in quite the measure we expected was airlines, airports and baggage handling companies facing enormous recruitment challenges. Is that going to happen again this summer when Brits want to go on holiday?
Yeah, you say we didn't. I think we did see the big bounce back, and we were talking to agents all the time about, you know, our airline delays. How are they putting off customers? They just weren't putting them off. They were causing huge frustration, definitely, and there were a lot of terrible headlines. But they were the only way people could travel. We did see a lot of ex-UK cruising doing particularly well because I think people were opting for that. So it's not that they wanted to forego their holiday. They just were looking at different ways of holidaying. So I really don't think it's going to have an impact. I mean, God, I hope that they've got their act together. Part of it was due to the government letting the industry know far too late that actually travel could resume. The people just didn't have the staff. We know that recruitment has been a big issue. But God, here's hoping that, you know, the people have been recruited that needed to be recruited in the airline industries, and we're not going to see quite the same delays as we saw last year.
Thanks very much, Sophie. So Ben, over to you next, please. So delighted to have Ben Ross, Head of Travel at the Telegraph with us. Ben's been in travel writing and travel editing since 2001, travel editor of The Independent formerly, Head of Travel for The Independent on Sunday, joined the Telegraph in 2014, and became travel editor in 2022, responsible for all the group's travel content in print and online. Ben, lovely to have you with us today.
Nice.
What are you predicting for the year ahead?
Well, I mean, I was interested to hear you and Sophie talking about this idea that we're all prepared to give up almost anything. You know, I think that's a sort of it's a trope that we've always used in the travel industry for such a long time. British people will do almost anything other than give up their summer holiday. They'll do without heat, they'll do without light, they'll do it without food. And I just have this slight concern that we are going to be trying to test that to destruction this year, because I think the key thing is the cost of living. I mean, it may not affect all readers and all users of our content equally, but it is going to be a factor in people's thinking. I certainly hope that you and Sophie are right. I mean, I really think it would be great if people are desperately keen to go and travel as much as is humanly possible. But I do think the cost of living sort of fundamentally will affect how the sorts of decisions that people make about their holidays. It's likely, I think, over the course of this year to have an impact on the duration of holidays. I think people will perhaps think about. I was speaking to TUI, I think just before Christmas, and there was a sense that there was a booking pattern where people were perhaps not going for a fortnight's beach break. They were going for 10 days, saving some money there. So they're not giving up their holiday, but they are adapting what they want to do. I think I wouldn't call it limiting horizons, but perhaps people are really sort of focusing on things that they know are going to do well. Jet2 have gone quite big on sort of returning to classic destinations, and I think they're probably right in doing that sort of thing. So, as Sophie said, Greece, Turkey's been amazing, hasn't it? Because of the value that you can get from exchange rates going there, and I think that from a long haul factor, that's why South Africa does well, because the rand is equally as weak as sterling at the moment. I think that's important. I mean, I agree. I think there seems to be a consensus that at least for short haul, we are going to be back up to sort of pre-pandemic levels this year, and that will have an impact on airlines and airports, as you mentioned, Henry. I mean, I sincerely, we're running a story today about it. I mean, I agree with Sophie. I really want to feel that the industry will be able to cope with that increase in demand, and that people will be able to take the holidays that they want without having to go through the vicissitudes that they did last year. I don't think we can tell that until it happens. It's finger in the wind at the moment. If they have got the staff there, then it will be fine. And if it's still still has a sort of tail of difficulty from last year, then that will be a problem as well. I mean, we're about to survey our readers again in the Telegraph Travel Awards. Top tip there, starting next month. But what we have seen, again, to Sophie's point, we are seeing people going back to those traditional destinations in long haul. They were all desperate to go back to Australia. The booking pattern for that seems to have gone absolutely crazy since then. Our readers in particular really want to get back there. And I think the only thing that's constraining them at the moment is just the sheer price of flights, which I think is going to be, again, a cost of living issue this year. US as well, despite the vaccine requirement, which I think is still sort of putting people off a little bit. So when that goes, that will be really helpful. I think we've noticed that towards the end of last year, Southeast Asia was a little bit wobbly for our readers. They didn't really want to read about stories there, and I think it's because they had sort of very severe lockdown restrictions during the year, and people were perhaps a little bit worried about what would happen to them if they did fall foul of catching COVID. It's certainly got a lot better now. There's been a big uptick in interest from a reader perspective. I think that's helped by Japan obviously coming back towards the end of last year. China returning to traveling itself will be interesting. It might have an effect on Thailand and Vietnam, but I think from a reader's perspective, it's brilliant that they're now showing signs of really wanting to return, where they were genuinely reluctant in autumn to read stories about that particular destination. They were much happier just going, well, here's a destination that I understand and know I can work through. I guess the other things that we've been thinking about, Sophie mentioned booking later. I think that we're certainly seeing that people are doing a bit of that. We've been delighted by actually our family uptake at the beginning of this year. So certainly even if they're not booking, they are thinking about booking. So that's really pleasing. Couples, again, I agree with Sophie. It's like a particle political broadcast here. We've been hammering away at honeymoon stuff, and that's gone terribly well for us. Obviously, lots and lots of people have been saving up, popping the big question over the festive season. So that's been brilliant, and we ran that on the cover of print last week, and it's doing very well online as well for us. All inclusive, again, we're back to the sort of value proposition there. It does make sense, I think, for people to want to lock in things, whether that means our readers are going to be booking now to do that, or whether they're going to be looking to see if there are any last minute deals later on. I can't tell, and Sophie will know far more about that than I will. And then in terms of sort of the way we're traveling, I think trains, Helen, trains. We love trains. That's something I was writing about just before Christmas, and I genuinely think European train travel, this is the year to be doing that sort of thing. Escorted rail. Our readers absolutely love that sort of thing, and we're seeing that bookings for that are really. Oh, sorry, I can't see bookings. I can say our readers are terribly interested in that. I've no idea what the bookings are doing, and that's very good. And cruise, it's weird. They seem to know what they want to do in 2025 now, 2024. I mean, it's that I've never had that sort of level of forward planning, but again, we're trying to service that urge and that need to get people as much information as they can about looking forward for particularly things like expedition cruising, where it does get booked out very, very quickly, and people need to really think in advance if they're wanting to do it. So we're giving them as much inspiration as we possibly can for that. And then sustainability, we mentioned right at the top of this. It's very hard to see whether I think readers want to spend more money on making sure that their travel is green and sustainable, but it is definitely the case that they definitely want it to be that, and that is brilliant. It should be part of everything. I think from a reader perspective, they want that to be part of everything they think about. They are assuming that tour operators have sustainability at their heart, even when they don't. So we want to make sure that the operators that do that are really being surfaced. And then I guess there's certainly, it is January, there's lots of interest in wellness. That's great. All our hotels content feels like it's doing terribly well, and that's the sort of gateway to a lot of our readers to interacting with Telegraph travel content. So I'm really hopeful that will continue. And yeah, I mean, if you know the trend, hopefully, you know, war in Ukraine, inflation, COVID behind us. I mean, there are a lot of complicated things sitting out there, but I think the general tenor of certainly what our readers are feeding back to us about, and certainly what they're reading online, where we can see sort of instant data on, is that they are really, really excited about getting to grips with the world again. Sophie pointed out there's a bit of pent up demand there. I really, really hope that 2023 is going to be very, very good for everyone in the industry, editorially and from a trade perspective. So yeah, very, very excited about it all.
Great, Ben. Thanks very much. So some of the big winners.
Always end on an That's my technique.
We're all incredibly hopeful. So some of the big winners, those long haul destinations that were absolutely off limits for periods of time. You know, Australia big, New Zealand, USA, and yeah, Ben.
I mean, Canada as well. I mean, from a Telegraph, I mean, I can't speak for any other audience, but from a Telegraph perspective, there is the return to the old favourite destinations, long haul English speaking destinations. They're always been enormously popular for the Telegraph, as we see every year in the Telegraph Travel Awards. It's terribly important to them that they can get back to it. They do feel a real need to connect with those destinations. It's brilliant that that's going to be happening. And you know, they'll be making the most of stopover destinations as well as they go to Australia and New Zealand. So that's really important for us as well.
Very good. I enjoyed your New Year writing very much, predicting everything from trips in helium airships to those European rail services. I wish ours were somewhere near as good.
Quite like that one as well. We got a lot of that. I mean, I do think multi-generation holidays are a real thing that we should talk about as much as possible. You know, whether you're going with grandparents, or whether the grandparents are taking the kids away, you know, which is, you know, increasingly something that we're seeing our readers want to do. Making sure that we're speaking to that audience, and I guess you know, anyone who's working in PR who's listening to this, if they can be thinking about that sort of thing in terms of the way they pitch stories, it really does help from our point of view. And you'll see an awful lot of the content that the Telegraph produces is about making personal journeys and making sure that the destinations that you visit are reflected in the lifestyle that you have, and quite often that involves making sure that the generation above you and the generation below you are interacting as much as possible.
That'll be an interesting trend as well. And are you still sticking by that final New Year prediction that this is going to be the year of Albania mania, Ben?
Well, look, I do think there is a sense that there's this notion of gamma destinations in there, which seems incredibly rude. But there is a sense that our readers want to try new stuff out. They've always been incredibly up for bragging around the Saturday dinner table with their friends and saying they've met interesting people, they've done things differently. That sort of immersive holiday, we try and talk. I think all of us will be trying to talk about as much as possible, because we know, whether it's from sustainability or from any other angle, it's a very, very good way of traveling. And it's the sort of thing that, you know, if you were interacting with the locals as much as possible, that in the end is the sort of thing that, you know, I don't want to sound too highfalutin about it, but it prevents wars, it prevents all the awful things in the world, and that's what travel is for. To a lesser extent, if some of the key destinations that they want to travel to are potentially a little bit unaffordable or overcrowded, which is always an issue, you know, over tourism is never going to go away from the narratives that we're trying to talk through. then yes, different destinations. It's great that Lebanon is looking like something that people can visit a bit more. The sort of the next tier of European city destinations, I think, are really, really important. Gabon, you know, things that people haven't thought of in the first place. I hope we'll be talking about that as much as possible with the Telegraph, because that's the sort of thing that I find most interesting. But, you know, we will also be talking about Spain. We'll also be talking about Italy. We'll also be talking about France. We need those destinations to be covered off as much as possible, because they're immensely popular with our readers. And if we can just give them a sense that there are different ways of exploring these wonderful countries, that will, I think, be an achievement for us this year.
Great stuff, Ben. Let's make it happen. So another person who's predicted success this year for Albania and indeed Bulgaria was Lisa Minot, head of travel at The Sun, the longest standing travel editor on what we used to call Fleet Street. Lovely to have you with us, Lisa, today. So Lisa's been with The Sun 31 years and head of travel for the past 23 years, award-winning travel writer who regularly appears on TV and radio, and I think gets out to more travel events possibly than any other travel journalist. Always lovely to see you at those. So Lisa, tell us about your thoughts for the year ahead, and also just give us a little bit of the insight onto your wonderful scoop of going on HMS WAG during the World Cup.
Yeah, that was actually quite surreal, being on that cruise ship in Oman, in Doha. Listen, I think for me, it's going to be, the whole year is going to be about one thing and one thing only, and that is value. We have got to demonstrate to our readers that this is the way that you will be able to afford your holiday this year. And it's going to be really important. Everything I'm looking at the moment comes from that value perspective. Now, I asked Caroline, our digital Supremo, I said, you know, what would you be saying that, you know, you're really looking for in terms of what PRs can provide for digital as well? And she was slightly sort of like bolder about it by just saying cheap, 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 cheap. It sounds really quite bold, but that is what we need right now. We need to demonstrate to Sun readers that they can get away. And the one thing that is really sort of, you know, making a big impact with our readers online particularly is value and, you know, basically just cheapness, cheap holidays, cheap flights. It is a challenge that we're going to have this year, I think, trying to look at perhaps destinations like the Seychelles, the Maldives. I've never had as many invites to the Maldives as I had over the last year. I don't know about you guys, but there just seems to be huge numbers of hotels and, you know, resorts that are really asking for publicity at the moment. But that's not the kind of area that I'm going to be focusing on 100%. We've got a piece this weekend on the beaches of Albania. You know, we have got that kind of content going into the paper, trying to get people to see that there is a possibility that they can take a holiday somewhere a bit different, and perhaps that will be the opportunity for them to take that holiday because it's going to be cheaper. All inclusive, as Ben said, is really important to us at the moment. I think for some readers particularly, they like their hands being held in a slightly different way than perhaps your broadsheet market would expect. And an all-inclusive holiday is something that will guarantee that from the minute they put down the money and they've actually paid for it, that's it. They're not going to have to worry about anything else. So that's definitely something I think is going to be something we'll be focusing on. I think something that will be, we've already seen the data on it, you know, all-inclusives are really important. I think one thing we will be focusing on more perhaps this year is cruising, and particularly ex-UK cruising, just because I think this is the one place that's demonstrating such fantastic value. I mean, you've got some ridiculous last-minute fares going on at the moment with the likes of P&O, you know, 2 weeks in the Caribbean, including your flights, for 950 quid. I mean, that kind of value, I think really needs to be sort of highlighted, and we will be doing a lot more on that. Now, those are lead-in fares, and I know that, you know, that's an inside cabin and everything else, but I do think that a lot of those ex-UK cruises are going to really going to be sort of, you know, a good tip, just because there is a lot of availability out there. You know, you've got P&O with these two huge ships, they've all of a sudden got to start filling. You've got MSC doing the same, you've got Royal Caribbean. So I think the pricing on that will mean something that's actually very attractive for some readers. Obviously, focusing on staycations as well is going to be a big issue for us. Not all of our readers take an annual holiday abroad every year. There is a section of our market that will be looking at home holidays. And so that's going to be really important. I want to make sure that we're getting people the best value possible. Just before we started this webinar, actually, I was regaling my fellow travel editors with a shock at somebody had sent in a piece saying, would you write about my holiday home? Fantastic holiday home in Devon for 8 people. It has a pub in the back garden. It's a great kind of thing for me. That works brilliantly on digital for us. Pubs are a huge thing. Anything to do with pubs, digital audience seem to love that. But it was a £450 cleaning fee for renting this particular holiday home. And that kind of thing is something that we will be looking at, making sure, to sort of avoid people having those kind of shocks. That surprised me. £450 for a cleaning fee for a holiday home for 8 people, I thought was just a bit wow. So we're going to be trying to take our readers away from that and into more of a value proposition, how people can do those, perhaps those second holidays that might be the ones that would go to the wayside in the sort of cost of living crisis. So that's going to be another issue, how you can take that cheeky little second break without it breaking the bank. So lots on that kind of thing. I'd always be welcome suggestions for UK stuff in general. We've also got to bear in mind the fact that I do have 2 very different audiences. I have an older, more affluent reader of the paper and the print product. They're perhaps not so impacted by the cost of living crisis because perhaps they've already paid off their mortgage. They are empty nesters. And then you've got the digital audience, younger, slightly less affluent, more family focused. And they really are looking for a deal. They're looking for a bargain. So we've got to try to cope with the 2 different markets in that sense. For the print readership, definitely long haul, the likes of Thailand and the US, perhaps, and then perhaps even a bit of Maldives, Mexico, Dominican Republic, still really important. But I am going to think twice before commissioning a trip to somewhere like the Seychelles this year. I'm just not sure that for my readership, that's the kind of product that they'll be focusing on. We're wanting value, we're wanting places that, as Ben said, they've revisited before. It always baffles me how difficult it is sometimes to actually get good content from places like Spain, because we're just not getting the kind of trips that we would actually say some readers would actually be going on. So the kind of content that I'm looking for is those traditional package holiday destinations. And then how we can do them a bit differently, how you can perhaps save money while you're exploring there, or see something a bit different, because that's the kind of added value that you want to give them as well. So yes, definitely traditional package destinations. I think the Balkans are going to be quite big this year in terms of Bulgaria, because again, it does demonstrate such value. And then if we're looking at long haul, it's got to be, again, a value proposition, how to save money, how to do it cheaper. That generally, I think it's all about focusing on those value propositions for me at the moment. One thing I was going to say, we were talking about, sort of the chaos we had in the summer with the airports. We have still got a slightly sort of scary thing on the horizon with the EU introducing these new biometric checks in May. We still don't seem to have any solution for our ports as to how this is going to happen, how you're going to get 8 people or 6 people out of the car and do all of the checks. Even though it's only the first time you do it, it's going to take a long time. There doesn't seem to be any solution to that yet. So there is still some issues there, I think, and that doesn't seem to have been addressed by the government at all. And that's before we then have the visas that are coming later on in the year. I don't think that's going to be as much of an issue. €7, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But these biometric checks, I think that is really going to be a big issue. Sophie was nodding in agreement with me there. What else can I say in terms of what readers are actually, sort of clicking on and what they're actually really interested in at the moment? What we've seen is a big push for that winter sun activities. All of our winter sun travel articles that we put in print, once they're going up online, they're really resonating with our digital readership as well. Those last minute sunshine holidays, winter sun, that seems to be something everyone's really interested in at the moment. And they're the ones that are really picking up on us in terms of like the hits coming through. Much more than we were actually expecting. So the mid-haul destinations, winter sun, really seem to be doing very well. The likes of Senegal did well, as well as Cape Verde, and even Egypt, the traditional ones, Egypt, Tenerife, Canary Islands. So that's definitely something our readers seem to be really looking at. They are looking at that sort of last minute, let's just sod it, get away. I think some readers will be booking holidays in the way that they always have done this year. It is going to be the last thing they're going to give up. But I think they're going to need a lot of reassurance and a lot of understanding that, we're going to have to show them how they can save the money, how they can actually achieve the holiday that they want, and giving them plenty of tips along the way. Fantastic.
Scintillating overview. Thanks so much, Lisa. And in passing, you sort of answered a question from Hayley Cornby, Newcastle Gateshead, saying, are staycations going to remain strong? You think they are, and I think you've got Northumberland on your list this year, so maybe you'll say hello to Hayley en route. Yes. And Ken, and then your team, lovely roundups. Sophie on your team wants to cruise. Ryan wants to go to Japan. Japan's got to be set for a great year this year. And Cara Godfrey has her sights set on Australia. Surely Australia is going to have a wonderful year from us pommies, don't we all think that?
Oh, very much so. I mean, it is definitely still one of those places. That is the bucket haul, long haul destination that some readers are still very interested in, still want to hear about. And as you said, we've got that pent up demand, people haven't been able to go and visit family and friends for the last 3 years. So definitely, we haven't had that much coming into the paper on that. I'm still, as I say, slightly concerned about putting very expensive destinations in. If I do, I want to make sure that I've got a counterpoint to it in the weekly travel section that perhaps is something of a much more value proposition, so that I'm making sure that I'm hitting all the markets and not just doing the sort of expensive stuff. It has to have a counterpoint with something that is actually going to be cheaper and more affordable. Hence, as I say, the staycations, really interested in finding out anything else about, different places in the UK that we perhaps haven't been visiting as much, and how we can do that and how we can do it for a value proposition as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lisa. And last but not least, we will hand over to Helen Coffey, the travel editor of The Independent. And I think Helen nicely balances our panel also in terms of the impact of green and sustainability issues in the travel industry and spends on travel and consumer choice. So Helen is travel editor of The Independent, having previously worked Evening Standard, The Telegraph and Express, and her passions include sustainable, climate positive travel. And in 2020, she became the first travel editor to give up flying. Her first book, Zero Altitude, this is a nice plug, How I Learned to Fly Less and Travel More, available all good bookshops, is a flight-free travel memoir in part, and part a climate change investigation. And it was good to see you. Your first tweet of the year this year, Helen, was A, that you would recover from your hangover, and B, that you were going to go for another year of not flying. So tell us your predictions, and also tell us your predictions from your perspective.
Thanks. Yeah, so as you could probably assume from that intro, a really big key area for us is sustainable travel. Obviously, personally for me, it's something I'm really trying to push, but I also do see that reflected, I think, in our readership and what people are interested in doing. It's difficult from the cost of living perspective, because as we know, the reason we all fly is because it is, generally speaking, much cheaper. And as Ben kind of mentioned, it's funny, sustainable travel is one of those things that everyone will say they want to travel sustainably. They really do. But in terms of that being borne out with, oh, it costs more money, we don't always see that reflected. People are like, yes, I'm really keen. Oh, quite expensive, never mind. But one area where I think we really do see the difference, and again, Ben touched on this, is train travel and the kind of massive resurgence in that kind of more old school way of exploring Europe. In particular, sleeper trains are just, every time we write anything on sleeper trains, people go nuts for it. They're so interested in it. Again, I think it kind of harks back to this kind of old world romantic idea they have about, exploring the continent on, like the Orient Express, obviously not that kind of hyper luxury. If you've been on most sleeper trains in Europe, they're nothing like that. But yeah, I find it fascinating how keen people are, and that is actually seems to be borne out in sales, because there's so many new routes coming up, and OBB in particular, the Austrian operator, are really extending their network massively across Europe. So we're just getting kind of new ones all the time. Like you might have seen the other day, people going nuts about the news that in May there's a new one from Brussels to Berlin, which means that for us we can kind of set off on the afternoon, Eurostar, get into Brussels, make a quick change, and then you're in Berlin before 7 a.m. the next morning. So it's kind of using that dead time when you'd be asleep. I think that's also a massive factor in people wanting to do it, because it really saves you time and actually is quite comparable with flying if you kind of get the right connection. That means, well, you'd have to spend that time flying anyway, and then you just arrive and have an extra night you have to spend money on a hotel, and this way actually you've kind of saved in that capacity. So that's something I think is going to become even bigger, even more exciting. It really shows in our readership figures, because yeah, they just love that kind of thing. And there are kind of companies that cropped up during the pandemic to kind of cover like that flight-free travel aspect. You might have heard of Byway and No Fly Travel Club, and also bigger operators actually launching new portfolios of here are our specific flight-free trips. So again, there's clearly a market that's catering to. There is demand for it, and it is small, but I think it's just going to keep growing and growing. So I think that's very exciting, and we're keen to push that in a very positive way. I actually just started a new column series. The first one's going up today, called Travel Positive, because what we want to do is celebrate the companies that are doing things well, or the exciting developments, rather than getting too judgmental and doom and gloom about it. Because as you know, from a behavioural science perspective, that doesn't really change people's mind. If they feel judged, they're not going to stop doing what they're doing. So we're really looking for positive stories. So actually that's something I'd love to hear about. If you've got kind of clients, or yours is a company or a brand that is expanding into more sustainable travel stuff, that is really good, and we want to champion it. What I am wary of is greenwashing, because as you know, with the increase in popularity in sustainable travel, we see loads of claims that as soon as you start digging into it, you're like, I mean, would we, you know, if you've got this new kind of like sexy eco hotel, but you know, you destroyed a great swathe of rainforest to make it, and you didn't compensate any of the local people, and no local people work there, we're not really going to just take that on face value and say, what a great climate positive story. So it does have to, you know, actually hold up under scrutiny, but we are very keen to celebrate that kind of thing. Elsewhere, it does sort of fit in with sustainability too, but actually a counterpoint to obviously some people aren't looking to go away for as long, but I think there's certain demographics who are actually shifting the other way and from going for much longer breaks, because either this is not really a family holiday market, I wouldn't say, but if you're a kind of youngish professional with a bit of disposable income who has a job where you can work remotely, I think what we're seeing is a lot of interest in actually I'm going to go away for 3 weeks or a month and do a kind of hybrid working thing, especially if you can get a good deal on accommodation and you're kind of escaping the energy bills. You know, over here, that's a bit of a narrative that we're seeing. Or in fact, the other end of the market, people who are retired, who are just like, F this, like it's all pretty grim in the UK. I've got some money. I'd rather just go away for a long time and get out of it. And actually one of the stories we saw do really well earlier this year was, I don't know if you saw the kind of EasyJet launching their month-long all-inclusive package holiday to Hurghada in Egypt. And it was very cheap. I think they said the lead-in price was £650, which is kind of insane. And our correspondent Simon Calder actually went over and went and interviewed some of them. And that was all older people, obviously, who didn't have to work, but they were saying that actually it was a really attractive idea to just get out of the cold, get out of the horrible kind of political climate at the moment, and just go somewhere hot, have all your meals taken care of. So I don't know if, again, that's something that we might see more interest in. And that sort of leads on to, as well, another thing we're seeing cropping up perhaps is the shift from people that have spent half the year in Spain traditionally post-Brexit with the 90 and 180-day rule, and now having to look at alternative non-EU destinations. So I think Egypt will do well from that. Turkey will do well from that. Other, non-long haul destinations, but that are not going to actually get that passport stamp and go, oh, well, I can't go back into Europe again now for another couple of months. So I think that will be another interesting shift that we're going to see more of. And I think, we've talked a lot about cost of living. I think that we could see more domestic staycations in terms of that. But again, it has to be good value, because as we know, one of the things that puts people off domestic breaks often is the price can be much higher than just going away. So I think we might see the kind of people benefiting from that are the cheaper options. So maybe people want to do more stripped back, like a kind of actual camping holiday, like really getting into the outdoors. Things like if we were going to Europe, what do they call them? Hostels, like posh hostels. So, not really slumming it, but actually looking for much better value accommodation prospects there as well. What else? Sorry, I've just written loads of random notes on here. I think as I think Ben touched on as well, this idea of immersive experiential trips, I think is big for our readers. So things where they feel like they've met local people, had local experiences, maybe it's a homestay somewhere, maybe it's a kind of, escorted guided trip, but in a way that feels very organic and adventurous, and like, I really spoke to the people who lived there, and, not this just being completely cut off from the culture that you're going to. And I think that kind of thing really speaks to our readers, because it also has a nice sustainability angle if you feel like the money is actually staying in destination rather than, what we call kind of economic leakage, where actually it's a foreign-owned hotel, you eat at like an international restaurant, everything you're buying has been imported, and your tourism money isn't really sort of helping anyone who's actually there. So it's a quite nice counterpoint to that. And what should I do? Finally, I don't know if this is bullshit or not. I'm always skeptical, but I've written the Netflix effect, because I do get a lot of press releases about things like, the latest one was after Emily in Paris aired, saying that Search for Paris had just absolutely gone phew. And I think there is something about, if it's a really popular show where the destination is very visible and very glamorous and sexy, and that actually it does spark people's interest again. Paris is always popular, but this idea of actually linking to a place and going, oh no, you've really sold it to me. So I think it's probably good to be looking out for those opportunities where a destination is really heavily featured and looks great, which, I mean, Emily in Paris is not the best show ever made, but it does make Paris look like, absolutely off the charts. So, yes, those are some of the top things that we've been looking at.
Yeah, amazing. And Paris City Breaks have done so well. So, very quick one. Julie Giraud of La Fontaine asks you, Helen, would you consider ferry travel as more or less sustainable than train travel?
Less sustainable than train travel, because emissions wise it's more intensive, but it is better than flying because of various reasons, including that they often take kind of cargo and stuff as well. Ferry travel is much harder to work out the emissions from, but is better than flying, but not as good as train, I would say. Okay,
excellent. Got questions flying in. Keep them coming, everyone. I'm going to turn to questions now. We've really heard so many wonderful thoughts from our panelists about destinations, about price, about the cost of living. I think the questions will get more into some of the kind of nitty-gritty issues, but just to get things up and running, a lovely one from Phil Bloomfield. Glad to know you're better, Phil, by the way. Can I ask the panel if they received my press release? I sent it 23 seconds ago and want to know if they will run it. It's got Instagrammable in the headline. Any serious response there? Does Instagrammable get your attention, or TikTokable?
Send Phil a magnum of champagne. I was going to say, Helen, White Lotus and Sicily did.
Yes.
That was for the Netflix effect. I mean, I do think people really do go for that. And there's, on the top end of the market, Black Tomato doing that big James Bond craziness at the moment. I do think people love sort of experiencing the things that they're having beamed into their heads every week. And why not? It's such an amazing thing to be able to do. And
I mean, as a point to that, we are going to be bringing back our Stay with the Stars column. We did that pre-COVID, and obviously throughout COVID it just got dropped. But I do think that because some readers respond so well, I mean, Love Island, again, that's going to be an opportunity to write about South Africa. So definitely that is something that we will be running on a weekly basis. And if any PRs want to send something through for that, it can be where celebrity has just been, or it can be, you know, as Helen says, connected to a show or something that's particularly, you know, sort of resonating with the TV audience as well. And on the subject of those Instagrammable press releases, they do drive us nuts. And they do just get instantly deleted. It just baffles me as to how we can keep getting the same press release over and over and over again. They must have it on some kind of a sort of, you know, set out to just come out into our inboxes, and it doesn't work. The more we get something, the more we're going to delete it.
You heard it here. So one more from Phil. I didn't say Phil heads up PR at Donata Travel, and obviously they have interests across airports and baggage handling and so forth. He says we can confirm the huge effort and investment that's going on behind the scenes in airport ops cargo to ensure that the resources in place to avoid a repeat of the disruption of last summer. But they're often hard roles to fill because of the nature of the job, and it's a low margin industry. He says travel businesses as a whole have a responsibility to make this an attractive sector to work in as well. Thank you very much for that, Phil. Okay, Amelia, PR manager at SEO Travel. What are you looking to see PRs deliver stories on in 2023? Anyone like to take that?
That's a very broad question.
It's a very broad. It is a very broad question, but
I think, truthfully, the things that, you know, the communications that I think all of us want are just a sense that there is a story at the heart of what we're being shown, and that it's a story that will reflect well on will go well with our particular audience. So, you know, just bear in mind that it has to stand out. Everything has to stand out these days, particularly digitally. You know, if you're trying to engage with a digital audience, sometimes you're only doing that with a headline. You're not giving it. You know, they don't have a beautiful picture necessarily with it. They don't have an extra fact box and all the bells and whistles. You just need to be able to deliver a really interesting story and deliver it pithily. Now, you know, we can always work together to produce that, but at its core, this has to be an interesting story.
And to Ben's point as well, to stand out, but also to stand up to scrutiny. So the things that Helen was saying about sustainability at TTG, we've got a real focus on that. You know, we're passionate about trying to do all we can to champion the industry, but we have to get the right news that's relevant to that does stand up to those greenwashing elements, because far too often we get press releases that you're just like, not really sure about that. You need to kind of provide all of the evidence to it and avoid that greenwash. It's so crucial.
Exactly, recycling grey water on a Maldives holiday. The two things are incompatible in terms of actually having a story that a sensible reader is going to understand and connect.
And also, I would just say as well, for me, it'd be something along the lines of, we've had this quite a lot recently. It's the kind of thing that Nigel, my fellow travel editor at Reach, and myself do sometimes. It raises our sort of blood pressure far more than it should, and that's when you're writing about somewhere. Put the price in the press release. You wouldn't believe the number of times you get a press release telling you about a sale that's on or a new hotel that's opened, and no idea as to how much this thing actually costs, what it will cost to go there, how much it will cost to take that trip. It seems to me quite obvious that if you're talking about something, you've got to tell people what the price is.
Actually, Sophie, wanted to come back to you about the challenges about the biometric issue. What's TTG's read on that? Are we going to have a problem that's going to get in the way of the wonderful summer of 2023?
Well, I think to Lisa's point, we're still waiting to see. I think there's just not enough information about how it's going to be tackled. I think everyone in the industry needs more information to know what it's going to look like. You know, at the moment we know it's going to look like the ETS scheme, the ESTA scheme that the US has. It's kind of going to be that version. Whether it's going to lead to lots of queues, God, I hope not, because that's the last thing this industry needs after last year. But I think there's just confusion about what it's going to look like. I don't know if you guys have any other intel on that at all, but
Well,
No.
there was a sort of like a press conference from the boss of the Port of Dover in November last year, basically saying that they still haven't had any indication from the government how it's practically going to work. The fact that, to start with, you are going to have this set of information that needs to be taken. You know, you are going to have to look into the little camera. You are going to have your fingerprint scanned, and how they're physically going to do that in a ferry environment, particularly a very busy ferry port like Dover. And that doesn't seem to have been addressed yet. And this is something that's happening in May, I think. So I mean, it really does seem to be something that needs to be sorted sooner rather than later. Because, you know, we've got May, you've got half term, it could end up being a bit of a problem.
And just to add, I was just looking at on our website, the last story we did was ABTA speaking in the House of Lords, warning of, quote, dramatic increase in passport queues to come. So I think the industry is trying to warn the government, but we kind of need the government to act. Yeah, so I think this is, it's a big problem that needs to be fixed ASAP.
Okay. We've got two questions, both from the UK market on press facilities, press visits. Lizzie Anderson at Visit Durham wants to know what makes pitches stand out, and anything you're particularly interested in this year, and the style and format of the email. And we've got Katie McLean from the lovely Custard Communications representing UK hotels. What's the best day for press visits, and what costs do you want covered? Lisa, would you like to kick off on that? Big UK focus, I know, on your pages.
What I love is a really precise email that tells me what the PR can offer. So that could just be something as simple as, we can offer you 2 nights at this hotel or this self-catering accommodation or whatever. This is the reason why we think you should be staying here, and these are the things that we think you should be doing. You know, we can suggest perhaps you should go here because it's brand new, it's just opened, or this is a, you know, perhaps a slightly off the beaten track part of the country that you haven't been to, and here's something to go and see when you're there. I like something that actually gives me some ideas and some options, rather than just to press an invite that just says, would you like to come to County Durham? I need something that's going to give me an idea as to what the content is going to be and how I'm going to actually be able to write the story. So something that's really precise. I don't need acres and acres, you know, bullet points is absolutely fine. But saying what you can offer in terms of a press trip. I'm in a slightly different situation to perhaps Helen and Ben, in that I don't have a huge commissioning budget. So I'm not accepting pitches from freelancers who perhaps may have done a lot of that work themselves, and they would have actually come up with a great angle, come up with a decent story. I'm having to sort of generate that myself. So for me, I need something that's going to be really easy for me to understand, work out exactly what's there, and then that will then go out to the very large number of Sun journalists that I would then use to actually send somebody on those trips. But just tell me very clearly and quickly what's involved, what you can offer, and what's new and different that you can add into that itinerary.
Very good. Ben or Helen, did you want to come in on that one?
I would like to quickly say, if it's a UK-based one of the things that often puts me off or is difficult on going is that, funny enough, if it's a trip to the Maldives, like, you'll get like all your travel and stuff. If it's a hotel in the UK, they very rarely offer to cover like train expenses. Now, I don't drive, and I'm not expecting if it was like, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, but we also don't, we all know budgets now are tiny. So I basically don't expense anything, and I don't know whether I could even get it across. So it's so attractive to me if someone like invites me somewhere, as Lisa says, that actually suggests an angle for why I'm going, but also it's like, we can cover your train costs up to X. I'm like, oh, mate, like, brilliant. That really puts it up to the top of the queue for me.
Excellent. So possibly a brave.
Could I just
Lisa,
quickly to add to that, even if the companies themselves may not have the budget, we've got getting lots of press releases at the moment, or I am particularly, from train companies who are desperately trying to get people onto the railways for leisure purposes. So perhaps tying up with a railway company, with a train company. So if you're looking at trying to do a trip, perhaps tying up with a train company and getting them to supply tickets would be a way of doing it, rather than us having to sort of put the two together as a such.
Excellent. Possibly a brave question from the lovely Daniel Mercado Gibbs at Lotus. Airlines and travel platforms have begun to explore NFT technology recently. We're seeing destinations and airlines adopt cryptocurrency payments, such as Vueling. What are your thoughts on this? Are you open to these sort of developments on your pages? Shall I say, is there one of you who would write about NFT payments for airline journeys?
We would write about all those sort of quirky technology things, but I don't think we'd necessarily be endorsing them at the same time. I mean, they're the sort of things that get a good uptake in readers. Mostly they'll be being concerned or confused or rude about it, but we're more than happy to write about it.
Very good. Okay, that's great. We'll get through a couple more. We're sort of running out of time here. We've got Laura Ross at Abode Worldwide wants to know, what is she saying? Do you like comments pitched in from travel companies? So is it worth sometimes just pitching in a viewpoint on the, in her case, the overseas property market?
From my point of view, excellent surname, by the way. From our point of view, yes. Definitely.
So just pitch in just paragraphs of viewpoint on where their market's going.
Yeah, it's just the sort of thing that might create a spark for a story. You know, I'm not, you know, on that basis, you've sort of owned the first moment of that spark happening. I'm not saying that it necessarily has directly the upshot that you might be expecting, but at the end of it, if it becomes a useful return to perspective or quote that we can get, that's really, really good, particularly consumer stuff.
Yeah, and especially if there's any kind of story that your client is relevant for, if you just proactively send quotes, comment, information, yeah, it might not get used, but we're very lazy. So if it just pops into your inbox, if I'm running a live blog on strikes and you've got a client that says, actually, we've looked at XYZ, there's every chance I'll copy and paste it in, because I'm like, oh, great. That keeps me going for another 15 minutes before I have to find something else to claw in and say. So yeah, I think it's a really good idea.
Stop with the whole secrets thing, Helen.
We're not lazy.
A similar question we had from Susanna Raposero, PR account manager SLC. It's a wide question, but your words of wisdom here would be really good. What is the best way to pitch to a travel editor?
Via email.
Email, Lisa?
Yeah. I'd much rather have just a really nice, precise, quick email from somebody, and then I can then respond back. Very definitely that rather over than phone calls.
Yeah, I'd agree. And from my point of view, if pitching ideas on Fridays is really, really good, and on Monday mornings right up until noon when my commissioning meeting starts, Henry.
Right. Duly noted. Thanks, Ben. Helen, what works for you?
Yeah, definitely email, not phone. I rarely even answer my phone because I'm a horrible person. Yeah, because then you know, we might not get that straight away, but then you have all the information there. I'm not, like, timing for you doesn't really matter because we're not print, so it's kind of all the time. So whenever, yeah, first thing on Monday, not great for me because it's a bit like, you know, but getting bombarded. I'm like to wait for it. Maybe like on a Tuesday is slightly better, but anytime really.
Very good. And Sophie, what works for you? What gets your attention?
Well, I would say send them to our features editor for features type pieces like that. Keep it succinct, definitely email, and just give it as much as a lead time as you can, and think of the, you know, relevant news hooks that would work for the trade audience.
Thank you so much to our panel. You've all been wonderful. Your insights about the year ahead have been fantastic. Lots to think about. Let's hope it's a fantastic year, not a bumpy ride. And thank you to our audience for joining us. See you at the next TravMedia Meets, which will be in probably 2 months' time. We're doing 6 this year. Very open to your ideas of topics and speakers. But to Sophie Griffiths, to Helen Coffey, Lisa Minot, and Ben Ross, a huge thank you for joining us today, and see you all soon.